and this is your Wednesday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Credit where it's due, I guess. Get to that in just a minute, talking about the Twins and playing through it last night. Much to my surprise, we got Chip Scoggins coming up on the show in just a little bit. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff with Chip, including how we think the Vikings season is going to shake out, how we think the Gophers football season might shake out, and what the Twins should do at the trade deadline. But first, what did I miss? And like I noted just a minute ago, Twins played through it last night. I was surprised. I turned on. I think I was just looking at my my computer at around 7 o'clock, and I was like looking outside. I was like, are the Twins are they gonna play tonight? Because it was the forecast didn't look good. Like there's legitimate threat of rain. Looked like the possibility of a rainout was pretty strong, and I was like, well, they don't necessarily have to play this game. They've got a day on Wednesday where they could potentially make up a doubleheader with Chicago. Chicago's still in town, but they played through it. And I've been critical of them for calling off games when it's kind of been borderline. And I think Tuesday was one of those borderline days, maybe even on the side of where I thought they would call a rainout, but they didn't. They played through it and they lost 4-1. Jose Barrios was great. He only gave up one hit. Unfortunately, that one hit came up after a couple guys got on base. Some poor defense by the Twins. I think they made 3 errors in the game. 2-run single kind of was the difference in the game. The Twins were chasing those runs the whole way. That doesn't mean they shouldn't have played. If they can get the game in, which they did, good for them. But just another one of those games that makes you realize this is just kind of the way this team is. They have a hard time putting together any kind of sustained stretch of really good baseball. Now, they've had 3 good starts, pitching-wise, in a row here with Kenta Maeda, Bailey Ober, and Jose Barrios now, but just enough deficiencies on this team that something always seems to go wrong. Tuesday night it was the hitting. They just didn't get a lot of clutch hits. The defense let them down a little bit, and they gave up, when the game is still close late, Alex Columnist gives up 2 runs, and they, goes from a 2-1 game to a 4-1 game. When you've got that many deficiencies, it's hard to hide any of them because they're all going to resurface at various points and doom you, and that is what happened in the rain. Billy Hamilton making a huge catch, by the way, in the rain on Tuesday night. So the Twins fall to 35-49 with that rain-soaked loss.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
Happy to have Chip Scoggins back on Daily Delivery. It's been a little while. It's it's summertime. We're all catching little breaks here and there, but you barely take a break. We're probably among the least break kind of guys in the newsroom. But Chip, how's your summer going?
It is going well. It's going well. It's I had a graduate, so it's been a steady stream of grad parties. I didn't realize till my daughter went through it how big a deal the grad parties were, but I've had an abundance of grad parties in the last month, so that's where my weekends have been.
All right, well, that could be worse things, little
No, it's fun.
get-togethers, things like that. It's kind of fun, right?
Yeah, it's great. The cool thing is, Mike, and I always make this pitch: if you have young kids and you're sort of on the fence about becoming a coach, whether it's soccer or basketball or football, do it. I promise you. I mean, it's a time commitment. But this wave of my son graduated, and so many kids that I coached in basketball and baseball when they were, when the biggest thing was juice boxes and animal crackers after the game. They didn't care about the sport. And then as they got older, they became middle schoolers, and then they got on, went through their high school career. And it was it's a little emotional at times seeing these kids that become young men and they're going off and starting the next chapter in their lives, but just the memories and catching up with them at these grad parties about being their coach. So that's my pitch to parents that with young kids, get involved with if they're involved in sports, become a coach. You won't regret it.
I have young kids. They don't really do youth sports yet, although I could see a couple of them getting involved. never thought I would be a coach, but then again, Chip, I haven't been asked yet, and it's probably hard to say no once you get asked.
Well, you will because you work in sports.
Yeah, they're going to assume I know how to coach because I'm in sports.
Exactly. There was one. I mean, I'll be the first to admit I don't know a lot about soccer strategy or alignments and positioning and all that, but I did get asked a couple times to coach soccer, and I can herd kids when they're younger. I can herd them, but you will get asked because if you work in the sports field, they will assume that you can coach, and do it, Mike. You will not regret it.
You are the Ted Lasso of East Metro youth soccer.
Right. That's right. Luckily, my soccer coaching days ended fairly quickly.
Okay.
I just do not know that sport.
Well, good to know that. That's interesting. That's fun. That's a good little introduction to this segment. I want to talk to you today about, some things that we need answers to, that we aren't going to get answers to probably for a little while here, but I haven't had a chance to talk about the Vikings for a while because honestly, we're kind of in the point of their season where it's the only time where they don't really do anything. Go for football as well, and maybe a Twins subject, but all these things kind of percolating, and they're going to get here faster than we realize because we kind of, July comes, we kind of take a breather from the sports calendar, but a couple weeks from now, we're going to be just full sprint ahead with trade deadline, with training camp, with Gophers football discussion starting up. So I want to start maybe with the Vikings, and just as we've had a chance to absorb a little bit of this off season, the remaking of the defense to a large degree, this idea of maybe this being, I don't say a last stand, but that's kind of dramatic. But the Zimmer Spielman alignment has been together for a while now. This is going to be year 4 for Kirk Cousins. It does feel a little bit like a make or break kind of year, at least in terms of their long-term vision. And as we sit here right now, how do you feel about that? Do you have a sense of how you think that will go as we get closer to training camp starting?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fair to call this a make or break season. And, we haven't heard from the Wilfs about their expectations. That's typically not what their style as owners. They're not going to be out there demanding, I would doubt, that this team get in the playoffs or win a playoff game or whatever their, private expectations are. But when you look at this regime and how long it's been together, it's pretty unusual by today's NFL standards. You typically see a lot of turnover, but the Spielman Zimmer regime has been together for a long time. And if they don't make the playoffs, Mike, that will be 3 times in 4 years. And so would the Wilfs still have patience? I think it's fairly well established that they like both Zimmer and Spielman and that they are patient owners, but 3 times in 4 years of missing the playoffs, I don't know that would, allow them to just kind of stand pat, because I think the temperature in town would be very hot at that point. But in saying it, all that, I like this team. I like what they've done on defense. Obviously, clearing up the Danielle Hunter situation with his contract was a major, major move. I wouldn't be surprised if they still try to tweak some things with it. The defense, maybe a rush end opposite. But when you look at, I was thinking about this, Mike, the last 2 games of the season, whatever their starting lineup was, I think you're on defense. I think you're only going to have 1 returning starter from that lineup in Harrison Smith.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have, if you looked at their last game, I think you're going to have 10 new starters to go with Harrison Smith, which is just staggering to think. How often do you see that?
Yeah.
You turn over a unit. Now, some of that was injuries. Obviously, some of that was just a lot of different things. But to me, Zimmer, even to, by his own admission, miscalculated trusting the young guys in the secondary last year. And we know how much he values veteran players and guys that have a track record, and putting his trust in those guys. And he went to Spielman and said, we're fixing this defense and we're fixing it with veterans. And I think that's what you're going to see. I think you're going to see a lot of these guys that they brought in, obviously getting back to injured guys or opt-out guys. That is a huge thing too. But especially in the secondary, all those veteran guys that came in, I wouldn't be surprised if you see just veterans joining Harrison Smith in the secondary.
Yeah, I looked at that a few weeks ago and did a podcast with Andrew Kramer and Ben Gessling, who cover the Vikings. And I think I looked at the New Orleans game specifically, the one where they gave up 52 points on Christmas Day, and I think it was Harrison Smith. There might have been one other guy, but I think that was it in terms of like who you might see on the field to start a game. And you're right, part of it was injuries, but part of it was it does feel like Mike Zimmer realizes that this is year 8. Whenever they've been successful, it's been because the defense has been good. And you can't, if this is what we like to term a make or break year, he's not going to get broken with a bad defense or a defense they didn't invest in at least.
No, and it's I think internally, I mean, they probably, both Spielman and Zimmer probably feel that Zimmer to a larger degree, because it's a lot easier to change a coach than a GM and completely overhaul. But I still think they are so tied together that maybe Spielman could survive if they made a coaching change, but you do wonder if they wouldn't just say, you know what, we're going to start completely over with the entire new regime. But without knowing exactly Aaron Rodgers' situation and whether he's going to play or not, this looks like, I was out there for the first day of minicamp, and this looks like a playoff team to me, Mike. It really does. Offensively, I think their offensive line is going to be better. They're going to, I would expect that both the rookies are going to start. Darrisaw and Davis. Now, they're not just going to anoint them. People are saying, well, they ran with the second team or third team in minicamp. Well, Mike Zimmer's not just going to give a rookie a starting job right out, But I think by the time they get to the opener, I think those two will be in there. So I think the offensive line is going to be better. You look at the skill position guys, they're really good. If they can protect Cousins, we've seen, the numbers he can put up. But it comes back to, I think, Cousins getting off to a really good start and not having a slow start where there's a lot of turnovers like we saw last year, where their season is in catch-up mode, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I think the defense is going to be dramatically better just by the guys you're adding who are coming back with Hunter and Barr and Kendricks, Pierce. And so I think that automatically makes them better. And then when you add in the other guys that they signed in free agency, this looks like a team that should be a playoff team.
I agree with that. I'm always skeptical of the offensive line until it actually is better, because I think we've seen so many iterations of, oh yeah, we got this guy, we got that guy, so that fixes things. I mean, certainly they've got more continuity. They've got a chance to have a young offensive line that makes sense, but love to see a veteran or two added to that mix that could be kind of a plug and play guy if one of these rookies isn't ready, because I feel like they're one or two guys short, and when you feel like you're one or two guys short, then that's a bad place to be one or two guys short.
Yeah, and I think the rookies are better than what they had last year, but they're still rookies, and there's going to be growing pains. They're not just going to step in and be Pro Bowl players, I wouldn't think. And so they're going to have the typical growing pains. And you're right, there may be, a veteran that's still a cap casualty somewhere, that a team is, up against the cap, and a younger player is going to beat out a veteran. Now, you're not cutting an all-pro offensive line. So you got to have some expectations there about what you'd be getting. But the plug and play, I agree that if you have injuries or whatever, we saw how decimated that line got last year and who you had to rely on. And it had guys that just should not be starting NFL offensive linemen.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Zimmer looked at, is like, we kind of joke about all the cornerbacks that they've signed.
Just one more.
I mean, you need just one more. But I think that's his thing. It's like, look who they had to play last year.
Yeah.
You're talking about guys that probably should be on the practice squad or were on the practice squad. And I think he said, we're not doing that again. We're going to fix our depth with veteran guys. And at least they have a track record. How good they are, who knows? But at least they have a track record. I just think Zimmer feels more comfortable with those type of guys than having to rely on a bunch of rookies, which, I mean, they had a game last year. I remember doing a column. I can't remember how many rookies on both sides of the ball that played, but it was just, I'd never seen it before that they had that many young guys. And so, but you're right. I mean, the offensive line is still improvement mode. You still have to prove that you're better and that you're going to be, a competent offensive line in pass rush. I think the center still has to show that he's going to make some improvement. Now, if you surround him with better guard play, will that make him better? I think that's the theory, but he's definitely improvement mode too.
So what's the, before we move on to Gopher football, I'm trying to decide in my own head, what's the minimum expectation or minimum level of achievement that they would have to, do in 2021 to make me think, okay, that was good enough. Let's run it back with the same crew again. Is it simply making the playoffs? Is it being more competitive than that? What is it that makes you think, okay, let's keep this going for another year or two?
Yeah, I would like to see, and this without knowing like what, the ownership's expectations are, but just getting to the playoffs, okay, that's better than not. But if you're really building towards something, you'd like to see them win a playoff game and, be a legitimate threat and not. That's been part of it too, Mike. Look at the Zimmer. Yes, they, every other year they make the playoffs or whatever, but look at the playoff losses.
Yeah.
And they've been so one-sided that it tends to kind of shape the way we view as like, were they really that close? When you get beat to that, degree, whether it's San Francisco or Philadelphia. I remember walking out at San Francisco Stadium after that playoff game and think they are miles away from being a contender. And so get to the playoff and win a game and show that, even if you lose, if it's, I hate to say moral loss, but the losses that they had just make you feel like they're not really close at all. And so I don't think it's just good enough to get to the playoffs. I really don't.
Gopher football. Where do you sit on that? Because I feel like we had two kind of wildly different years. You had such a high of 19, when they won 11 games, even if you wanted a little bit more, if they could have had one more win, it could have been gone from a really, really good season to a special season to last year, which was so much of a lost year. I'm having a hard time, A, figuring out what expectations should be this year, and B, like, what do I consider successful for this year's team? Should we be all in on this year's team at this point, or are we still kind of waiting and seeing and trying to understand what this team is all about once they start camp?
I would say if not this year, then when.
Okay.
Because look at the experience that they have coming back. You have a 3-year starter at quarterback, a 3-year starter at running back, who's going to be one of the top running backs in the country, a really, really good wide receiver. Their offensive line, they're all like 27. I mean, they're 5th and 6th-year seniors. I think they have a 7th-year senior tight end. I mean, these guys, they have the most experienced offensive line in college football. Defensively, Fleck went out and got some of the grad transfers to come in and plug holes where they really were thin. Defensive line, this is probably the most depth that they've had in defensive line. Well, it is. Not probably. It's definitely the most depth that they've had in his time here, where they have a legitimate 2-deep along the defensive line. They went and got a linebacker from Utah State that's a grad transfer. And so you're not going to have a more experienced team than he has right now because the NCAA given the free year and almost all their seniors, except the guys that went to the draft, took advantage of it.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be this way next year in 2022. They're not going to be this old and have this much experience. And so, yeah, last year, and PJ says he wasn't disappointed by it because of all the things that were happening. Okay, I'll buy that a little, but they defensively, there were just things that, were not good enough. Offensively, they weren't good enough. So you have the same system offensively, same coordinator now, so you're not changing systems. So really, I think you've taken away all the excuses that can be had. That really give me an excuse for why this team shouldn't be a legitimate factor in the West Division. And that comes down to you got to beat two of the rivals, one of the two rivals. I mean, look at his record against Wisconsin and Iowa. I mean, this is a time you need to go win those games. And so I think the expectation should be you have a very experienced team that has been in some big games. We're not going to hear Fleck talk about their youth this year because they're not young. They're very old. And so I just don't see there are no excuses for this team.
Yeah, I like that. I feel like that's a good point in terms of if not now, when, because this isn't the program yet where you just say every year that it could be their year.
No,
They have to have more than one breakthrough year before you think this is going to happen every year. Kind of like when Wisconsin
sure,
got the ball rolling, then all of a sudden the 8 and 5 years were their down years, not their up years.
sure. And I just, how often are you going to have a quarterback as experienced as Tanner Morgan and a running back and an offensive line that's as experienced as this offensive line is? I mean, I think they have some NFL players on that offensive line. I mean, they have some real talented guys that came back and Fale opting back in after sitting out last year. So, yeah, they're not at the point where you can just, pencil them in for 8, 9, 10 wins every year. I mean, they're clearly not at that point, but when you have all these kind of factors come together and look at the number of grad transfers or just transfers that came here and took advantage of the one-time transfer exception to fill immediate needs. I think PJ was real strategic in how he looked at his roster and said, we're not good enough there. We're not good enough there. Let's go get some transfers that can plug and play right now. And so I think they realized, where their weaknesses were, and they don't really want to have that year where they take, okay, we're going to come in, redshirt this guy, and in 3 years he's going to be better. I think they said we're really thin along defensive line. Let's go get some grad transfers and put guys in there that can play right away. And so to me, that says they realize, hey, you have all these factors. You have this veteran team. We need to try to, make a big leap this year, coming off a weird year.
Last thing, Chip. I've talked about this with Lavelle. I've talked about this with Patrick Royce. Twins trade deadline's coming up in a few weeks. We're not going to make probably any moves immediately, but once we get back from the All-Star break, there's only going to be a couple of weeks until that deadline. Based on what we know at this moment, it kind of feels like a dilemma here in terms of how active they could be as sellers at the deadline. Basically, if they're super active, it could be a sign that they don't think they're going to be competitive next year either. But if they're only a little bit active, are they really maximizing any value and trying to get really good again at a certain point here instead of just kind of treading water? So I'm curious to know what you think they should do and what you think they will do. Are they going to be super active sellers? Or are they going to be like, on the fringes, clear out one or two, expiring contracts and kind of moves?
Well, I would say be super aggressive, but that is under the assumption that the guys that you're trying to get rid of have a high deal of value, which I just don't see it on this team, to be honest with you. I mean, I think Barrios does, but there is no way I would trade him.
Really? Okay.
I wouldn't trade him because who do you have left? I mean,
that's the one. I mean, that's the one where if you trade him, you're admitting you're not going to compete in 22, but you're also saying, well, we're not competing with him in 21, even though he's been pretty good. So
I just think you got to have some good players. You can't just have a bunch of prospects up here. But he's the one guy that would bring you value. It'll be, I don't, maybe they fool themselves into thinking all these guys are just having down years, even though they had down years the previous year too. But okay, what kind of value is Sano going to give you? You're
nothing.
not getting anything in return. Taylor Rogers, I he would bring you some value, but again, going back to, if you do that, if you did Rogers and Barrios, to me, that you're telling your fan base, strap in. This is going to be a long.
See you in 2023. Yeah,
but this is going to be a long rebuild.
Is that what they should do though? Because I don't know if this is. They're not young. Like you talked about the Gophers. Well, they're not young.
That's the thing. It's like this. Kepler's not young. Polanco's not young.
Sano's 28.
So is Polanco. He is what he is. Yeah, they're not young players. So this is not like, the guys you wouldn't trade are, Larnach, Killeroff. Those are, that's the future. That's your foundation. Right. You're not trading those guys. They are the Bucks and Sano of 5 years ago, where you're thinking, okay, this is our future. So no, I think there's only probably two guys that I think Cruz for American League team could, but probably just getting prospects right. I mean,
yeah,
you'll have value, but what are you getting back in return? I think the guys that really give you value are Barrios and Taylor Rogers. But Mike, you got to have some good pitching. I mean, their pitching has just been horrendous, and there's not to say that you can't, keep those guys and still try to piece other things together moving forward with some of the young guys. But I would, Simmons, I get rid of, I think Cruz. I don't know that anybody would take Donaldson
right.
With his injury history and that contract. I mean, it's fun to talk about, but realistically, is anybody going to want to take on his contract with his injury history? I doubt it, So, but I mean, nobody wants a rebuild because that's such a taboo word in sports world now. So I would not part with Barrios because I just don't see, if you told me you had 4 pitchers in between AAA and AA that you think 3 would be ready next year, I might hear it a little bit more, but I just don't see it,
Yeah, I think your answer to the Barrios question probably answers the bigger picture question better than anything else. I would need a big offer, but I don't think I'd say he's off the table just based on he's been your best pitcher this year and you're still, double digits back, more than halfway through the season. You might have to get a little bit worse to get a lot better. So I don't know.
It would be interesting to see because, sports executives are so cognizant of saying rebuild to their fan base that they know what that means. That people's like, all right, you want to rebuild? Here's my season tickets.
Yeah.
I'll circle back with you in a couple of years when you're
right.
deep, because people aren't just going to want to put down hard-earned money to watch a bad team play. And you sell and hope because the Twins have been down it. You sold Sano and Buxton that hope for years. And, Buxton when he's healthy, but the Sano thing has just been, he's a platoon guy. I mean, he's an absolute platoon player now.
He's a corner infielder platoon guy, which is not what we had hoped for Miguel Sano.
And if I'm correct, I think the 3rd highest paid guy on the team this year.
Yeah, not great.
In annual salary. So,
well, we'll see what they end up doing. Good stuff, Chip Scoggins. Thank you for joining Daily Delivery as usual, and we'll catch up again soon. Actually, you'll be on next week too, talking about the 1992 Final Four as part of that special series. So look forward to Chip on that as well.
Let's end with the cooler. Giannis Antetokounmpo went from doubtful to questionable to playing in Game 1 of the NBA Finals on Tuesday. I was surprised. at first that he was listed as doubtful despite seeming like he was making good progress. All of a sudden he shows up in the starting lineup. Wasn't enough though. Bucks lose 118-105 to the Suns in that game. Suns take Game 1 of that series. They're looking like they're going to be a pretty formidable opponent. Got to admit, it was kind of a weird game to watch for me. It still doesn't feel like an NBA Finals matchup. I don't mean that as any kind of slight on these two teams. It just didn't quite feel like it. I'm just so used to having LeBron in the finals, or the Warriors, or both. It was strange to watch a Suns-Bucks finals Game 1, and maybe I'll just get used to it as the series goes along. I love that these two teams made it. I think it's good for basketball. It just felt weird to me. It didn't feel like an NBA Finals game, but I'm sure it felt like that to those two teams, including Chris Paul making his first Finals appearance, scoring 32 points in the victory. That'll do it for me today. Good show coming up tomorrow, and then Friday I'll be joined by Paul Clauda, our high school sports editor, for a swan song for him. We're going to talk a lot of prep sports, our high school sports editing days, and talk about some high school athletes who are getting honored as well. Thanks for joining me here today. Download this podcast. Please write a review. Rate this podcast wherever you get your finer podcasts. Read Star Tribune, StarTribune.com. We'll be back at it again on Thursday.